You see, Wendy, when the first baby laughed for the first time, its laugh broke into 1,000 pieces, and they all went skipping about, and that was the beginning of fairies. Come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy, hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand.
Those are just two quotes about the mythical creature that we call a fairy, and that gives you a sense of their duality. So sometimes they're these cute, lovable, slightly mischievous creatures, and sometimes they're a bit more dark and sinister. So what is a fairy? Sometimes it helps to start with the name of a creature to understand where it comes from. The word fairy comes from the Latin fee, describing a cunning woman. This would be a woman who would practice magic, although she may well have just been a healer using natural remedies. A very similar origin to the word witch. So fairies are deeply rooted in the magical feminine, in the same way that we get the concept of witchcraft. They have a similar origin story. And just like witchcraft, you would want to ward off fairies, because often in the past, they were seen as evil and malevolent. This item from the Museum of London is called a witch bottle, and it was crafted to ward off evil magic. And that was something that fairies were associated with, evil and wicked magic. So forget the cute Tinkerbells of today. Fairies were vampiric child thieves. They could steal your children. They were spirits of nature that could play cruel tricks on you. And some even believed that they were fallen angels who were stuck here between the earthly plane and hell. But how did we get from these malevolent nature sprites to cutesy Tinkerbell today? Well, we can largely hold the Victorians responsible for this. Now, they loved to use classical imagery, ancient gods and deities, but they were also very staunchly Christian, so they were afraid of anything that looked too pagan. So they took the idea of fairies, but they kind of rounded off the corners, sanded off the edges, and created something more palatable to a young, childlike Victorian audience. This shoe from the museum's collection is called Sequin Fairy, and it embodies everything that fairies are today. It's designed by Emma Hope, and as you can see, it is pink, fabulous, glittery, gaudy, hyper-feminine. This is the image of fairies that we have today, despite their more sinister past. So since the Victorian period, fairies have become childlike and ultimately feminine in their depiction. If you look at this image of a ballet, you'll see from the costumes that they're very much beautiful, but kind of prissy, fragile things. Now, because fairies became so associated with this particular image, it became a very popular slur to use against any men that did not live up to masculine ideals. To call someone a fairy was to basically describe them as being like this. Fairy became just another insult like Nancy or Pansy or Puff, which basically describes gay and effeminate men as being limp-wristed, weak and feminine. And obviously, that's the worst possible insult you could throw at a man. Because of the patriarchy and because of misogyny, describe a man as being like a woman, well, that was seen as the ultimate emasculating and offensive thing to do. And just like many slurs thrown at the queer community, fairy has been reclaimed. So back in the 1970s, Harry Hay, who was a gay activist, took the word fairy and created a group called the Radical Fairies. The idea being that a group of bisexual and gay men would come together and be open about their sexuality, but also embrace a more pagan, natural way of living. So they wear bright colours, go into forests, do pagan rituals and dances, and celebrate their sexuality. They were also very keen on not trying to ascribe to fitting in. So heteronormativity would ascribe that gay men try to be more straight to fit in, whereas radical fairies were very much celebrating their difference, kind of saying, yeah, we're fairies, and what? But the story of queerness to fairies goes back even further than that, and it comes down to theatre and performance. So in a number of ballets and theatrical shows, you would have characters depicted as fairies. Now, largely, these would be women in pink tutus and little wings, but you would often have another archetype, that of the dark fairy. So you see this character very much popularised in Disney's Sleeping Beauty, in the character Maleficent, the dark, evil fairy. It would often be popular for this character to be played by a man, despite the character being female. So you have this kind of transgressive, cross-dressing going on. This beautiful cape was part of the costume for a dark fairy called Carabosse. Now, Carabosse was performed by a man called Enrico Cacchetti, who was a ballet dancer. Now, the character of Carabosse is very much equivalent to Maleficent, the dark, evil fairy that wishes to take revenge. One of the most well-known depictions of fairies has to be in Peter Pan. So Peter, the main character, he gets his name, Pan, from the ancient Greek god of forest. So he's a bit of a sprite character himself, that's why he can fly, and he even has his own fairy, Tinkerbell. Now, in theatrical performances of Peter Pan, it's very common for the male character Peter to be played by a woman. Therefore, another common form of cross-dressing associated with how fairies are portrayed. So for all of these reasons, fairies are incredibly popular with the queer community today. They're beautiful and powerful. They have a dark side and a light side. They're a great opportunity for gender bending, so you can play with masculinity and femininity when you dress up as a fairy. And they're also a reclaimed symbol, something that was used to mock the perceived femininity of gay men and then reclaimed as if to say, well, okay, you called us fairies, we'll be fairies, but we'll be awesome fairies.